This is the story of one of the most influential and underrated bands from the 1960s, a band that started out in London as a blues covers band that, as the 60s progressed, went on to become trailblazing pioneers of hard rock, psychedelia, heavy metal and even punk. Amongst their band members was not just one or even two, but three of the greatest guitarists of all time, and the many acts and solo careers that were spawned by this one band would go on to become massively influential, popular and legendary in their own right. This is the story of the Yardbirds. The story begins in the leafy southwest suburbs of London, 1963, where friends Keith Ralph, Paul Samwell Smith, drummer Jim McCarty and Laurie Gain started a band called the Metropolitan Blues Quartet, or the Metropolis Blues Quartet, depending on who you ask. One night they met guitarists Chris Dreyer and Anthony Topham in a pub in Kingston, Surrey called the Railway Hotel, where at the trad jazz nights there was a chance for anyone to get up and play during the breaks. Hearing the two guitarists play covers of Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry and Elmore James songs, music still rare and exotic in Britain at the time, the Metropolitan Blues Quartet invited the two guitarists to join the band, with Samwell Smith wisely choosing to switch to playing the bass. Laurie Gain had already left to go to university, so they were now actually a five-piece band, a five-piece quartet. Their first proper gig was as a backing band for the British blues pioneer Cyril Davies at Kingston Art School, May 1963. After a couple of gigs, later in 63, performing as the Blue Sounds, they then changed their name to the Yardbirds after Keith Ralph saw the word in Jack Kerouac's On the Road, where it was used to describe railroad yard hobos, and of course was also the nickname of jazz legend Charlie Parker. By the autumn though, guitarist Topham, still only just 16, was under increasing pressure from his parents to quit the band and focus on his academic work. He was actually a talented artist, and his parents were adamant that he shouldn't continue with this music thing, even though the band were on the verge of turning professional. He was in two minds anyway, so ceded to parental pressure and left the group in October 1963. Luckily, singer Keith Ralph happened to know a guitarist he had met on the Richmond pub scene. He was also known to Chris Dreyer, as he was attending the same art school as him. Even Samwell Smith had met him, although he didn't realise who it was until later. A few months earlier, at the Railway Hotel Jazz Night, a member of the audience, upon hearing Samwell Smith's rudimentary attempts at playing the guitar, went up to him after the gig and said, "Do me a favour, don't ever play that guitar again." That audience member was an 18-year-old obsessive student of the blues named Eric Clapton. When he was 17, he had been in a band called the Roosters, whose other guitarist was Tom McGuinness, later guitarist with Manfred Mann. Clapton had also played a few gigs with a band called Casey Jones and the Engineers, so already had some stage experience. However, it was his studious approach to playing the blues that set him apart from his peers. He sat for hours in his room, slowing records down, trying to transcribe the solos note by note. By the age of 16, this approach was paying off. He was already light years ahead of most of his fellow blues enthusiasts. Getting a replacement in for Topham was now an urgent priority, as they had attracted the attention of a certain local club owner who was looking for a replacement for his house band. His name was Giorgio Gomelsky, and he was the owner of the Crawdaddy Club in Richmond, where a local R&B band called the Rolling Stones had been the resident band since February. Gomelsky had effectively been the Stones' manager up until that summer, when they had opted instead to go with one of Brian Epstein's associates, Andrew Loog Oldham, on the recommendation of the Beatles. Disappointed at having lost the Stones, he was eager to find the next big thing in the burgeoning British blues scene. Giorgio Gomelsky was born in 1934 in Georgia and had discovered jazz at the age of 10 whilst living in Italy. Stuck in the house due to the 4 p.m. German curfew, he discovered a gramophone and jazz records in the attic. After the liberation of Italy, black American GIs helped him further his jazz education. Post-war, he grew up in Switzerland, but his Anglophile mother was sent to work in London, from where she would send back copies of the English music paper Melody Maker to her son. Reading about the new, largely undocumented British jazz scene convinced the young man he should go to London and make a film about it. In London, he got involved in the jazz scene and witnessed the evolution from jazz to skiffle to blues as the likes of Chris Barber and Alexis Korner committed themselves to it, the former to a more country blues style, the latter to a more amped up Chicago blues variety, forming the band Blues Incorporated. Inspired by this, writing for the paper Jazz News, he coined the term BRB, British Rhythm and Blues. Gomelsky, along with Barber, was instrumental in helping to put on a regular blues night at the newly established Marquee Club, and then became involved in putting on a blues festival night. Performers included Alexis Korner and the Rolling Stones at the Piccadilly Club. But he wanted something more lasting, so he sought out a venue outside of central London where a band could build a real audience through a residency. He found the Station Hotel in Richmond and set up his blues night there to take place every Sunday. He knew the area well enough to know that Kingston Art School was full of music lovers and that there would be a big audience for it. After the first band that he offered the residency to dropped out, he gave it to the Rolling Stones. Named the Crawdaddy after the Bo Diddley song Crawdad, the first night drew about 3 people to see the Stones, but in subsequent weeks the crowds grew and grew until the place was packed out, week in, week out. In addition to his talents as a writer and a filmmaker, Gomelsky had a skill for publicity and managed to get reporters coming from the Richmond and Twickenham Times to write about his club. This led to an article in the Daily Mirror, which had the largest circulation of any British daily newspaper at the time. Unfortunately, this also led to the Crawdaddy being evicted from the Station Hotel, as the brewery that owned it did not approve of such degeneracy taking place on their premises. A replacement venue was quickly found, however. Just a block away at the Richmond Athletic Association, the Stones continued to build their following, not just at the Crawdaddy but all over London, and soon the Stones were signing with Decca, releasing their first single and going off on tour. So Gomelsky needed to find another band. Gomelsky's friend, the photographer Hamish Grimes, recommended that he check out this band called the Yardbirds. Gomelsky went along to one of their rehearsals and was staggered by what he heard. Just as he was walking up the stairs to the rehearsal room, he could hear the band jamming, building up to an almighty crescendo of pure noise and chaos before suddenly dropping back down into the song with renewed intensity. They had secured the gig before he'd even entered the room. Gomelsky had always wanted a band that had improvisational inclinations, he said, that could add to this ritualistic thing that characterised the exchange between the stage and the audience. Gomelsky had previously encouraged the Stones to extend their version of Bo Diddley's Crawdad to over 10 minutes for the same reason. Now, with the Yardbirds, he had found a band that were already doing it, extending songs with their crescendos of noise and excitement, not only doing it already but with an energy and a purpose that was unique to them. Like the Rolling Stones, the Yardbirds played Chicago blues, Howlin' Wolf, Bo Diddley, Muddy Waters, Sonny Boy Williamson, Elmore James, songs like Smokestack Lightning, Rollin' and Tumblin', I'm a Man. But the Yardbirds, with their ability to whip up an intense sonic frenzy out of thin air in the middle of a song, offered something that was at the time uncharted territory for a British R&B band. And this approach was encouraged by Gomelsky, who wanted to see the band expanding beyond the blues thing. Because I'm against purism, he said. I'm for authenticity, but against purism. Gomelsky saw the creative potential of the Yardbirds almost immediately. This was the very beginning of the idea that rock and roll could reach out and pay tribute to all this underdog music that nobody was listening to, he said later. Stravinsky was a big hero of mine, always. I totally encouraged all that noise stuff. Eric Clapton played his first gig with the Yardbirds on the 18th of October 1963, not at the Crawdaddy but at a place called Studio 51 in Leicester Square, London. The following night they then began their residency at the Crawdaddy. In the following weeks they also played regularly at the Ricky Tick Club in Windsor and a club in North London called Edwina's Club, with the Rolling Stones drawing a crowd of 1,000 people every Sunday night at the Crawdaddy. The Yardbirds had some pretty big shoes to fill, but with their uniquely energetic twist on the Chicago blues, the club continued to be packed out every weekend. And elsewhere, the blues and R&B scene was exploding all over London, with bands like the Animals and the Kinks drawing from the same well of influences but offering their own unique sound. In December of 1963, the Yardbirds started touring with the American bluesman Sonny Boy Williamson II, a move engineered by Gomelsky. Sonny Boy Williamson II was a living blues legend, with many classic singles released on Chess Records throughout the 50s, as well as being a part of Elmore James's band in the 50s in Chicago. As is typical of legendary early bluesmen, his real age is not really known. He may have been born any time between the years 1897 and 1912, and he had many different names. The name he was born with was probably Alex Ford, but he was also known as Alex Miller, then Rice Miller, Little Boy Blue, and Little Willie, before finally calling himself Sonny Boy Williamson. As there already was a legendary blues harmonica player in Chicago called Sonny Boy Williamson, other people later added the second onto his name to avoid confusion. It's thought that Alex Rice Miller probably chose the name to make people think he was actually the real Sonny Boy Williamson. The Yardbirds would play their set first, then be joined for the second set by SBW2. Clapton and the Yardbirds were delighted to be sharing the same stage as a genuine Chicago blues legend. However, they later found out that Sonny Boy Williamson didn't exactly feel the same way. Those British boys want to play the blues real bad, and they do, he later said. Clapton later had it confirmed also from Robbie Robertson of the band, who had also played with Sonny Boy in America at this time, that he returned from England basically talking shit about the Yardbirds and the Animals. Recordings from the tour were later released in 1966, and while the performances are good, the frenzied excitement of their usual sound is very much reined in, maybe understandably so, out of their respect for the elder bluesmen, as they were there just to provide backing. Following the tour with SBW2, in early 1964, the Yardbirds were signed to EMI's Columbia label. With Beatlemania at the time reaching unprecedented levels, and with the success of the more rough and ready Rolling Stones, labels were eager to capitalise by signing the next big young guitar group, and the R&B bands of London were ripe for the picking. The Yardbirds began their recording career at the Marquee Club on the 20th of March, when their live sets were recorded. This became the basis for their debut album, 5 Live Yardbirds, which was released later in the year. 5 Live Yardbirds perfectly captures the furious energy and raw power of the band's take on the Chicago blues, documenting what Gomelsky was by now calling the Rave-up, that building up to a chaotic crescendo of noise before diving back down into the song. And you have to look no further than the very first song, a cover of Chuck Berry's Too Much Monkey Business, to hear how different the Yardbirds were to the other R&B bands that were around at the time, starting with a very enthusiastic live introduction by the MC Hamish Grimes, the photographer who had originally suggested the band to Gomelsky. Clapton actually launches the song with an intro played in the wrong key, I think, but it doesn't matter, as what follows is nothing short of explosive. At first, the song hurtles along with spirit in much the same way as other R&B groups at the time, such as the Kinks, would play it, albeit with brilliant lead interjections from Clapton. But when it gets to the instrumental section, that's when the Yardbirds really crank it up. Paul Samwell-Smith's bass goes high up the neck, with Clapton delivering fast but perfectly executed flurries of notes, and then the band crank it up even further and thrash each of the 3 chords of the song repeatedly and intensely before dropping back down to start the next verse. For 1964, this sounds insane and feels like you just had your head strapped to a rocket that's now hurtling through the upper reaches of the stratosphere. It's important to note that no other guitar band on the planet at this time was playing with such speed or ferocity in this particular way. As such, it marks the first appearance of what later became an essential building block for the genre of music that came to be known as rock, and two of its subsequent subgenres, heavy metal and punk. The Yardbirds' Rave-up can be heard later, giving the most obvious example on Led Zeppelin's debut album, particularly on the song How Many More Times. Of course, Led Zepp were directly related to the Yardbirds, and we'll get to that later, but also Lemmy from Motorhead was a frequent visitor to the marquee around this time, and later cited 5 Live Yardbirds as a major influence on him, saying he went through many copies of the album, playing it so often that he would wear it out. It's not just on the opening song either. Throughout the album, the Rave-up is a central feature of most of the songs, most spectacularly on Smokestack Lightning, which builds into an almighty climax, which sustains for a while at its peak before charging back downhill again into the main riff. The effect on the audience was profound. People had simply never heard music that would let them rip like that. Drummer Jim McCarty said, "At the Crawdaddy, people would actually be swinging from the rafters." Elsewhere on the album, the band is no less energetic on songs by Slim Harpo, the Isley Brothers, and 3 songs by Bo Diddley. Their version here of I'm a Man already has the ramped up tempo of their later recorded version, but doesn't feature yet the double time section, which features the guitar and harmonica interplay that later became the climax of the song. Here 'Tis closes the album even more frenetically than it began, with superb back and forths between Samwell Smith's bass and Clapton's guitar. 5 Live Yardbirds is a seriously underrated album, typically seen as less interesting or not as important as their later work. It nevertheless contains the blueprint for hard rock, heavy metal and punk. Proto-metal and punk pioneers, the MC5, clearly took notes from this album when they also released a highly energetic and raucous live album as their debut album in 1969. Kick Out the Jams as well, you might notice, also starts off with an enthusiastic MC introducing the band, although it's got slightly more swearing on it. The album actually wasn't released until December, so way before then. In May, the Yardbirds' first studio recording was released, the single I Wish You Would, which contained a pretty good approximation of the band's live sound, complete with a mini rave-up in the middle. The single didn't chart, but the band did make their first TV appearance on Ready Steady Go, performing the single live, not miming, on the 22nd of May. The band was by this point playing all over London most nights of the week, as well as now venturing further to play other places in the UK, whilst continuing their residencies at the Crawdaddy and the Ricky Tick Club. They also appeared on several other UK TV shows throughout the summer and played their first gig abroad in Locarno, Switzerland, probably due to Giorgio Gomelsky's connections over there. However, they had to do that without Keith Ralph, who was actually hospitalised with complications stemming from his severe asthma. He actually missed 6 weeks of gigs. They got the singer from the R&B band who had supported them a few times, the Authentics, to replace him for the dates. Ralph was a chronic asthmatic all his life, surviving a brush with death in his childhood due to a severe asthma attack. It's a wonder he was able to sing and play the harmonica at all, given the poor state his lungs were in throughout his life. He recovered though and rejoined the band on the 3rd day of the band's first package tour. The Yardbirds with Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, the Ronettes, Cliff Bennett and the Rebel Rousers, and either the Kinks or the Nashville Teens, depending on which city they were playing in, all performing 2 shows a night. Just after this tour, the band's second single was released, Good Morning Little Schoolgirl. Yes, those were different times back then. This time managing to just miss the top 40, peaking at number 44. Musically, it's probably less representative of the band's live sound than the previous single, but it all chugs along very nicely, and then Clapton steams in with an absolutely ripping tone for the solo, and this may be the very first record featuring Clapton playing his famous Red Gibson ES-335 that he later used with Cream and Blind Faith. The B-side of the single was I Ain't Got You, which in my opinion is better than the A-side, as it contained an even greater guitar solo that slashes through the speakers with a savage tone, overdriven and raw, really heady stuff for 1964. The band toured relentlessly for the remainder of the year, and on 4th of December, 5 live Yardbirds was released. It failed to make the charts. Lack of chart success was starting to become a concern for the band. After all, 1964 had been the year the Beatles had broken through in America, with the Rolling Stones following suit, leading to an insatiable American appetite for basically any British group with slightly shaggy hair and guitars. Giorgio Gomelsky and Paul Samuel Smith were particularly keen on finding a way to break into the upper reaches of the charts, and thus pave the way for an American trip. Clapton, however, found himself at odds with the others. He had no interest in changing anything that they were doing to become more commercially viable. He hated the package tours they were doing, where they only played a few songs before being hurried off the stage to make way for the next act. Samuel Smith and Clapton had also clashed at recording sessions when the band had recorded a song called Putty in Your Hands, a pop song by the Shirelles, and also Got to Hurry, which was a blues instrumental showcasing Clapton's ability on the guitar. Samuel Smith seemed to be pushing for a more pop and folk oriented direction, whilst Clapton just wanted to remain rooted in the blues. They had also recorded another throwaway pop song called Sweet Music, produced by Manfred Mann, which had further irritated Clapton. On Christmas Eve, they played their first in a series of shows at the Hammersmith Odeon as part of the Beatles' Christmas show. This turned out to be a pivotal moment for everyone involved, including Clapton, who met George Harrison for the first time and became his lifelong friend. For the rest of the band, it was also crucial, as it was at this event, that they met a music publisher from Manchester who gave them a tape containing a song written by a young songwriter called Graham Gouldman from a band called the Mockingbirds, who would later go on to form 10cc. The song was For Your Love, and upon hearing it, the band wanted it to be their next single. As 1965 dawned, Clapton found himself at odds with Samuel Smith more and more, as the bassist took on more responsibility for the band's direction, both musically and commercially, taking an interest in sound engineering, production and arranging as well. When it came to record their new single, there was another song in contention as well, Your One and Only Man, an Otis Redding song that Clapton was all for, but after recording For Your Love, upon hearing the playback of the finished song, everyone except Clapton absolutely loved it, and Samuel Smith decided it had to be the next single. Clapton was also upset at the fact they had hired studio musicians to play the main instruments on the record, the harpsichord and the bongos, with the actual band members only appearing briefly on the song's bridge, which was only a few seconds long. Then Clapton read a memo that declared Samuel Smith was now the band's musical director officially from Gomelsky. That was the last straw for Clapton. He went to see Gomelsky in his office and told him he was leaving the band. Worried about the manager bringing up the contract he had signed, Clapton was shocked by Gomelsky's reaction. He could have made it tough for me, he said later, but he didn't. He just said, okay. In reality, Gomelsky and the 4 other Yardbirds had been sensing Clapton's uneasiness and increasing unhappiness within the confines of the band, and guessed it was probably just a matter of time before he wanted to go his own way. Clapton honoured the next couple of months of live dates, and then just before the For Your Love single was released, on March the 3rd, 1965, Eric Clapton left the Yardbirds. So how would the Yardbirds bid for chart success fare without their star guitarist? Would the new single be a hit? Would they get someone anywhere near to Eric Clapton's level of ability on guitar to replace him? We'll take a look at all that in part 2 of this deep dive into the Yardbirds. So until then, make sure you subscribe to this channel. Click like, click the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. That's all from me on this one. Bye for now.